Hey there, welcome back. You've sent us some really interesting articles about what's happening in Ethiopia right now. Everything from taxi fare hikes to a brewery trying to take on the big guys, and even some major shakeups in the insurance industry.
Wow.
So get ready to dive deep because we'll be looking at new taxi regulations, the debate over GMO policy, some big changes happening with insurance company leadership and regulations, a brewery startup trying to break into the market, and the potential impact of USAID funding cuts.
Sounds like a lot to cover.
It is, but by the end of this deep dive, you'll not only be in the loop on these specific happenings, but you'll also have a better grasp of the bigger picture they paint about Ethiopia's economy and where it might be headed.
It's an incredibly dynamic time for Ethiopia, that's for sure. There's a real sense of transformation happening across so many different sectors.
Let's kick things off with something that affects just about everyone. Taxis. You've probably been in a taxi at some point, and in Addis Ababa, the drivers are facing quite a few challenges these days.
Yeah, the articles highlight some real struggles. The city has implemented new regulations extending operating hours, but drivers are pushing back, arguing that there just aren't enough passengers late at night, especially in the outskirts, to make those extra hours profitable.
It makes you wonder what the thought process was behind extending those hours in the first place. What are the potential benefits the city might have been aiming for?
It could be part of a broader strategy to improve mobility and make the city more accessible around the clock as cities grow. There's often a push to expand transportation services to meet the needs of a 247 economy.
That makes sense, but if drivers aren't making enough to cover their costs during those extended hours, it doesn't seem like a sustainable solution. The Ethiopian Transport Workers Federation is calling for a 50% nighttime fare increase and the creation of designated late-night zones. Could those be viable solutions, or would they just create new problems?
A fare increase could help compensate drivers for those lean hours, but it could also make taxis less affordable for riders, particularly those who rely on them the most during those late-night hours. Designated zones are an interesting idea, as they could potentially concentrate demand and make late-night service more efficient for both drivers and riders, but it would require careful planning and consideration of accessibility for all areas of the city.
It sounds like there's a real need to find a balance between the interests of the drivers, the needs of the passengers, and the city's goals for expanding transportation services. It's a complex issue, and I wonder if these taxi struggles might be connected to some of the larger economic forces at play in Ethiopia.
You've hit on a crucial point. These taxi issues aren't happening in isolation. The articles about Shigar City, the new development project on the outskirts of Addis Ababa, highlight the tension between rapid urban growth and the cost of doing business.
Right. The article mentioned this aggressive new leasehold system that Shigar City is using. What exactly does that mean, and how is it impacting businesses?
Essentially, a leasehold system allows individuals or companies to lease land for a specific period rather than owning it outright. It's a common approach in urban development, as it can facilitate more efficient land use and generate revenue for infrastructure projects. But the implementation of this new system in Shigar City has been quite disruptive.
The article gave the example of SBG Industry, the company that makes Arki bottled water. Their lease rate went from 1.21 birr to 56 birr per square meter, practically overnight. It's hard to imagine any business being able to absorb such a massive increase without consequences.
And that's exactly what's happening. SBG Industry had to shut down operations for weeks, and they're not alone. Other companies like Aqua Addis are facing similar struggles. The Ethiopian Beverages Manufacturing Industries Association has said that over half of its members located in Shigar City are in dire straits because of these policy changes.
It seems like the city's goal of modernizing land ownership and raising revenue is coming at a steep price for the businesses that are already operating in that area. Do you think this rapid development is worth the cost to existing businesses and their employees?
That's a question with no easy answers. There's certainly a need for modernization and investment in infrastructure to support Ethiopia's economic growth, attract investment, and create jobs. But if it displaces existing businesses and livelihoods without adequate support or a plan for their transition, it can create instability and resentment. It's a delicate balancing act, and the city's approach seems to be prioritizing rapid development over the needs of the businesses that are already there.
That's a great point. It seems like there are always trade-offs involved, and it's important to consider the potential downsides of even well-intentioned policies. Now, let's switch gears for a moment and talk about something a bit more uplifting beer. Amidst all this economic uncertainty, a new brewery, Kegna Beverages, is making a bold move.
They're a fascinating case study. It's a group of local enterprises and farmers, primarily from the Oromia region, who have pooled their resources to create this new brewery. They're investing $250 million into a massive factory in Ginchi Town, hoping to compete with the big players like Heineken.
$250 million is a huge investment, especially for a startup in a country facing economic challenges. What made them decide to take such a big risk?
They seem to have a few things going for them. Firstly, they've secured significant backing from enterprises within the Oromia region, giving them strong local support. Secondly, their location in Ginchi Town is strategic. It gives them access to both the barley farms that are crucial for their production and the Addis Ababa market, where they'll be selling their beer.
It sounds like they've thought carefully about their strategy, but from the articles you provided, it seems like they've hit some snags along the way.
Absolutely. The foreign currency shortages that Ethiopia has been experiencing created major delays in their equipment deal with Kronos AG, a German company that specializes in brewery equipment. It's a reminder of how external economic factors can impact even the best laid plans. What I find particularly interesting is that even with a substantial loan of $110 million from the Development Bank of Ethiopia, they still needed a year of operational support from Kronos just to get things moving.
That's quite a significant development. What are the implications of such a delay for a startup trying to enter a competitive market?
Well, it certainly adds to the pressure they're facing. Time is money, especially in business, and a year-long delay can be incredibly costly, both in terms of lost revenue and the need to adapt to changing market conditions.
Right, and then there's the 40% excise tax on beer in Ethiopia. That means Kegna beverages can't simply compete on price alone. It seems like they're relying heavily on high-volume production and some innovative sales strategies to make their mark.
They're definitely betting on scale and efficiency, and it'll be interesting to see how their sales strategies play out. They'll need to be creative to differentiate themselves in a market that already has some very established players, but even with a solid strategy, they're facing a complex set of challenges. There's fierce competition for barley, and the farmers who supply it are dealing with rising input costs themselves.
It sounds like they're navigating a very tricky landscape. Do you think they have a real chance of success against the giants like Heineken?
It's a David and Goliath situation. That's for sure they're going to need to execute flawlessly and adapt quickly to the ever-changing market dynamics. But one thing they might have in their favor is timing. Ethiopia has relatively low per capita beer consumption compared to other countries in the region. If they can navigate these hurdles and tap into that potential growth, they could ride a wave of increasing demand.
So it's a risky venture, but with high reward, if they can pull it off, it definitely makes you think about the opportunities and challenges that exist for local businesses trying to break into industries dominated by global players. Now, let's dive into a topic that's generating quite a bit of controversy. GMOs, Ethiopia's recent decision to commercially approve genetically modified maize and cotton, has sparked a lot of debate.
This decision has far-reaching implications, and it's understandable why it's generating such strong reactions. To understand the context, it's important to first understand what GMOs are and why Ethiopia is turning to them.
That's a great point for those who might not be familiar. Can you briefly explain what GMOs are and why they've become such a hot-button issue?
GMOs, or genetically modified organisms, are plants or animals whose genetic makeup has been altered in a laboratory to introduce traits that don't occur naturally. This could include things like resistance to pests, or herbicides, tolerance to drought, or increased yield. The debate around GMOs centers around their potential benefits and risks. Proponents argue that they can increase food production, reduce reliance on pesticides, and improve nutritional content. Critics, however, worry about potential environmental impacts and control of the food supply by large corporations and the long-term health effects, which are still being studied.
That's a really clear explanation. So why is Ethiopia, a country known for its rich agricultural biodiversity, turning to GMOs?
Ethiopia has been struggling with food insecurity and low crop yields for years. There's a strong desire to boost agricultural productivity and reduce reliance on foreign aid. GMOs, at least in theory, offer a potential solution. They have the potential to significantly increase yields, which could address food shortages and potentially even boost exports.
One of the articles mentioned that Nigeria saw a massive increase in maize yields after adopting telemaize, a genetically modified variety. We're talking about an increase of up to 10 tons per hectare. That's a game changer, especially for a country facing food security challenges.
Those potential benefits are certainly appealing, especially when you consider the urgency of the situation. But it's crucial to acknowledge the valid concerns that people have about GMOs as well. Critics worry about the potential for these genetically modified crops to contaminate Ethiopia's diverse native plant varieties. There are also concerns about corporate control of the seed market and whether small-scale farmers will be able to afford these seeds and the accompanying technology. And then there are the unresolved questions about the long-term environmental and health impacts of GMOs.
So it's a high-stakes gamble with potential benefits and risks that are difficult to fully assess at this point. It's understandable why people have such strong opinions on both sides of the issue. It makes you wonder what the long-term consequences of this decision will be, not just for Ethiopia's food security, but for its environment and the livelihoods of its farmers.
It's a decision that demands careful consideration, thorough risk assessment, and ongoing monitoring. The potential benefits are significant, but so are the potential downsides, and it's essential to have a robust regulatory framework in place to manage those risks and ensure that the technology is used responsibly and ethically.
That's a really important point. It's not just about whether GMOs are good or bad in principle, it's about how they're implemented and regulated and who benefits from their adoption. It's a complex issue that deserves a nuanced discussion. Speaking of complex issues, the insurance industry in Ethiopia is going through some pretty dramatic changes itself. There's a new CEO at the helm of the Ethiopian Insurance Corporation, Able to Des, and the National Bank of Ethiopia is proposing some sweeping reforms.
It's an interesting time for the insurance sector. Able Tedesi has a reputation for being a dynamic leader. He worked his way up at Awash Insurance and even had a hand in shaping the Sovereign Wealth Fund strategy for the Ethiopian Insurance Corporation.
That Sovereign Wealth Fund is a fascinating concept. Could you explain what it is and how it relates to the insurance industry?
Certainly, a Sovereign Wealth Fund is a state-owned investment fund that invests in a variety of assets, including stocks, bonds, real estate, and even private companies in Ethiopia. The Sovereign Wealth Fund has a stake in the Ethiopian Insurance Corporation. This means that the fund's investment strategy influences the direction of the corporation.
That makes sense. So what are Able Tedesi's plans for the Ethiopian Insurance Corporation? It sounds like he has big ambitions.
He's laid out a vision of transforming the corporation into a customer-centric, technology-driven organization. He's also talking about preparing it for a public listing on the Ethiopian Securities Exchange, which would be a major step towards privatization.
Wow, those are some ambitious goals. It seems like he's really trying to shake things up, but it also sounds like there are some significant challenges facing the industry as a whole.
You're right. The National Bank of Ethiopia is proposing a series of governance reforms that are going to have a big impact on how insurance companies operate.
What are some of the key changes they're proposing, and how will they affect the industry?
One of the most significant changes is the stricter rules around board composition. They're requiring more independent directors, at least 2 women on each board, and even employee representation, which is a pretty progressive move.
Those are some pretty substantial changes. It sounds like they're trying to increase transparency and accountability within the insurance industry. I imagine there will be some pushback from existing board members who might see this as an encroachment on their power.
Resistance to change is always a factor, especially when it comes to established power structures. But these reforms are designed to modernize the governance of insurance companies and align them with international best practices.
And they're not just focusing on board composition, they're also streamlining the election process for boards and enhancing whistleblower protections, which is a really important step towards greater transparency and ethical conduct.
These are all positive steps, but there's a potential disconnect between these ambitious goals and the realities on the ground.
What do you mean?
Well, for starters, there's a severe shortage of actuaries in Ethiopia. Actuaries are professionals who specialize in assessing and managing risk, and they're essential for the insurance industry. This shortage is forcing companies to hire expensive foreign talent to comply with the new IFRS 17 reporting standards, which are international accounting standards specifically designed for insurance contracts.
That makes sense. So even though these new standards are aimed at improving transparency and financial stability, they're actually putting a strain on insurance companies in Ethiopia because they don't have enough qualified personnel to implement them effectively. What's the impact of this shortage on the industry's ability to function and grow?
It creates a real bottleneck. Without a sufficient pool of local talent, insurance companies face higher costs and may struggle to keep up with the evolving regulatory landscape. It also raises questions about the long-term sustainability of the industry if it's overly reliant on foreign expertise.
That's a really important point. It highlights the importance of investing in education and training to develop local expertise in specialized fields like actuarial science.
Absolutely. And it's not just about human capital. Many insurers are struggling to upgrade their IT systems, which are crucial for managing the vast amounts of data needed for risk assessment and complying with these new reporting standards.
It seems like these reforms, while well-intentioned, are creating a significant burden for insurance companies that are already grappling with limited resources and expertise. Do you think these companies will be able to adapt quickly enough to meet these new demands?
That's the million-bird question, and it remains to be seen whether these reforms will ultimately benefit consumers or simply create more bureaucracy and red tape for insurance companies.
It's a fascinating case study in the complexities of implementing reforms in a developing economy. You have these ambitious goals of modernizing and strengthening the insurance industry, but you also have to contend with the practical challenges of limited resources and capacity.
It's a delicate balancing act, and the success of these reforms will depend on a number of factors, including the government's commitment to providing the necessary support, the industry's ability to adapt and innovate, and the availability of skilled professionals.
To our listener, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Ethiopia's shifting landscape. We hope you found it as illuminating as we did.
If you're interested in learning more, we'll be sure to include links to the original articles in the show notes.
And as always, we'd love to hear your thoughts and reflections on social media. Until next time, keep diving deep.
And keep asking questions.